If you're watching this video right now, there is a 1 in 3 chance that you have insulin resistance. And in this video, I am going to share with you 8 signs and symptoms of insulin resistance. And then I will share with you 3 changes you can make in the way you eat to help reverse insulin resistance. So first of all, what is insulin resistance? Insulin you might have heard of in relation to diabetes. Insulin is the hormone that helps to control the levels of glucose, or we can say sugar, in the bloodstream. So whenever we eat something that's sweet or drink something that's sweet, or eats something, particularly starch, that breaks down into sugar molecules or glucose molecules, that causes blood sugar levels to go up. But because the body likes blood sugar levels to be nice and steady, it's going to secrete insulin from the pancreas to bring those blood sugar levels back down and keep them down at the normal steady state level, right? Now, if you're eating a lot of things that cause glucose levels to go up frequently or to stay up, eventually the body has to produce so much insulin that the cells of the body get a little tired of all this insulin knocking at their doors, and so after a while they stop responding to insulin, and that is the state of insulin resistance, which is basically when insulin stops working efficiently and effectively. When insulin resistance happens, it means that blood sugar levels stay up longer than normal, but because the body always wants to bring blood glucose levels, sugar levels down, it tries to produce even more insulin, thinking that, hey, there must not be enough insulin, so I need to produce more to get these sugar levels down. But it's not that there isn't enough insulin, it's just not working. And so this vicious cycle continues where you just keep producing more and more insulin, and insulin levels stay up, and it's not doing its work because the cells aren't responding to insulin in terms of bringing down blood sugar, but instead all this insulin starts to wreak havoc on the body. And that is when you start seeing the signs and feeling the symptoms of insulin resistance. And so I'm going to tell you 8 of those symptoms right now. One of them is excess belly fat. Essentially, what insulin does, it tells the body to store excess glucose as sugar, and the more insulin, the more fat storage, right? And essentially, like I said, sugar gets stored as the fat around the belly, in the organs, and essentially all over the body, but especially around the belly and in the organs such as the liver, right? So excess belly fat is one of the signs. Another one is high blood triglyceride levels. Now that's one of the sort of bad types of fat or bad types of cholesterol. And insulin tells the liver to convert sugar into triglycerides, which gets, the triglycerides floats around in the blood, or some of it is stored in the liver, and some of it actually goes into the gallbladder. And I did a video about how, you can get gallstones from having so much cholesterol or triglycerides secreted into the gallbladder. A third feature is that, or sign is that, of insulin resistance, is that you retain water easily. So what insulin does is that it causes the kidneys to retain more salt and water, and so you would notice that you have a lot of puffiness, swelling of your legs, and some people talk about having puffiness of their fingers where their rings are just so tight and they're afraid that they are never going to be able to remove their rings, right? So retaining water is another feature of insulin resistance. Another feature is that your blood pressure is high, and that kind of ties in with the same water retention thing, because whenever you retain water, salt and water retention, it means that your blood vessels have a lot of fluid stretching them out, and so that just increases the pressure in the vascular system overall, and that's how you get high blood pressure, right? Fifth one is whether or not you have a family history of heart disease. So usually, some of these things are genetic, but more than just genes is that family members tend to eat similarly. So the second generation, is going to learn from the first generation certain eating patterns, and so a lot of times people would think that, these things run in my family, heart disease, diabetes, etc. But it's just that patterns of eating run in the family, okay? Anyway, so having a family history of heart disease, like heart attack, heart failure, and so on, that might indicate that you have a risk for insulin resistance. Another one is a family history of type 2 diabetes. Again, similar thing, just apart from genetics, I mean, there may be a contributor from genetics, but we know that genetics accounts for maybe 2% of diseases, traditional, diseases, and it's mainly the environmental or lifestyle factors that drive diseases. So you can have like a genetic predisposition to a condition, right, a disease, but that does not mean that you are predetermined you have to get the disease. What you do externally can turn on those genes for the disease or turn them off, right? So family history of type 2 diabetes. And then the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th one. This one is a very obvious one to tell. And this is if you have patches of darker colored skin, sort of velvety appearing skin in certain areas of your body, especially the back of the neck. Tends to be like at the side of the neck right here, and a lot of times too we see it in the underarm region. It's just these thickened patches of skin that look quite velvety. For a light skinned person, it might be sort of brownish, in color, but certainly darker than your regular skin. And then for a darker skinned person, these patches can actually look literally black. Okay, so having those patches, or it may be, and by the way, those black patches or dark patches, it's called acanthosis nigricans. So acanthosis means thickening of the skin, and nigricans meaning darker coloration or black coloration. And then also the other skin change is that you might have what we call skin tags, basically just kind of almost like not warts, but like polyps, or just basically skin tags. It's like hanging skin. A lot of times, again, in the same area of the acanthosis nigricans or the dark skin, you might see like just little flaps or tags of skin along the neck here in the underarm area. Sometimes we see it in between the upper thighs, basically in areas of friction. You see those skin tags. So for the skin changes, it's the darker colored skin, velvety skin behind the neck, under the arm, or the skin tags. And then the last, which is the 8th sign or feature, would be if you have polycystic ovarian syndrome. This is specifically for women. Having polycystic ovarian syndrome could be an indication that you have insulin resistance, because the insulin is what kind of triggers or stimulates the ovary to become cystic. It just kind of stimulates the follicles to kind of overgrow, and then you have these big old cysts forming because of the effect of insulin. And then for men, it's erectile dysfunction because of the dysregulation of the male hormones. They have less testosterone, more estrogen, and by the way, that's vice versa for women. It's quite odd, but essentially this hormone insulin kind of scrambles a lot of the other hormones in the body. It just kind of sends things haywire, right? So these are some of the features or signs or symptoms that may indicate that you have insulin resistance. Now, if you have 2 or more of these features, then there's a quite significantly high chance that you have insulin resistance, and so you probably should see whoever your healthcare provider is to really get proper testing done, right? To see, are you already diabetic? The concern about insulin resistance is that it is the driving force behind a lot of the common sort of lifestyle conditions. We say lifestyle because how you eat and move and so on determines whether or not you develop these conditions. So conditions like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, like we said, obesity, fatty liver disease, all these things have to do as their online cause the fact that there is insulin resistance in the body. And so that's why we should be concerned about insulin resistance. You might have heard instead metabolic syndrome, which they used to call syndrome X, because it wasn't quite clear why people had this constellation of signs like high blood pressure, being overweight, high cholesterol, being pre-diabetic or diabetic, etc., right? So all these things are tied together by the one common factor or feature, which is insulin resistance, right? So okay, we know the features. I went through the 8, right? Let me just say them again quickly. Excess belly fat, high blood triglyceride levels, you retain water easily, you have high blood pressure, you have a family history of heart disease, you have a family history of diabetes, you have the dark colored velvety patches of skin on you, or skin tags in areas of friction, or you, for women, have polycystic ovarian syndrome, or for men, you have erectile dysfunction, right? So 2 Yeah, if you answer yes to 2 or more of those features, there's a high chance that you have insulin resistance. Now, don't despair, because you can actually reverse insulin resistance. Of course, the earlier you catch it or tackle it, the more likely you are to have a complete reversal, right? So, yeah, you are able to reverse it, and there are 3 dietary changes I will tell you about that you can employ to help to reverse insulin resistance. Insulin resistance, and kind of avoid some of the diseases that come along with it, right? Now, the first thing, well, it has to do with that. Now, exercising, because if you exercise or you're more active, then it means that your muscles are working and they're able to utilize or use up a lot of that glucose, so that you're not going to be having high blood glucose levels, because your muscles are going to be using up the glucose, right? So you don't need to store it because you're using it, right? But other than exercise, which can be pretty challenging to get sometimes because, we're also busy, right? Then there are things you can do with how you eat, right? So I'm going to go through 3 things for that. One is you can have a low starch diet or low carb diet. Essentially, carbohydrates or starches are a string of glucose molecules for the most part. Now, the more refined the starch or carbohydrate, the more glucose or sugar you're going to get from it, right? So like white potato, pasta, white rice, there's not much to those. Now, more complex starches will give you fiber. Fiber is a starch, but it's an indigestible starch, right? So you have vegetables. Vegetables are, carbs, right? But it's just that so much of vegetables is water and fiber. So incorporating way more vegetables in your diet so that you can sort of crowd out the effect or balance, cancel out the effect of any little starch that you might have in your diet, right? So doing that, because you're having vegetables and not as much starch, you can have a lower blood glucose response, blood sugar response, and so you will not be calling or stimulating or triggering the release of insulin as much from the pancreas. Eventually, what happens is that when your body gets a break from being bombarded by insulin, the cells wake up and they start responding again. So they're not resistant anymore. And so you can gradually decrease the resistance and gradually increase the ability of the cells to respond to insulin. So once you really stop bombarding it, you're eating more vegetables, right? More fiber, so that you're not absorbing all that sugar and flooding your liver with all that sugar, then your blood cells can wake up and say, oh, and then after several months or so, depending, then you might have a little treat sporadically and your blood sugar levels don't go up as high because your cells are now sensitive to insulin as opposed to being resistant, right? So lower your starch intake and instead have more vegetables to have that fiber that will slow down the absorption of sugar into your bloodstream, okay? When I say vegetables, obviously just any vegetables, but you want to kind of try and have them be sort of crisp, crunchy, crisp. Different textures for different people, but you don't want them to be overcooked and excessively soft, right? Broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, string beans, all those things, spinach, all those things you're going to get good fiber from. The second thing is to increase your protein intake. Now, protein is quite satiating or satisfying, as we would say, if you eat protein. Now, protein can cause cause an insulin response to an extent, but just maybe very small, not half as much of an insulin response compared to starches, carbohydrates, and so on, right? So you will get a bit of an insulin response from protein, but a fraction of what you get with starch. And the thing about protein as well is that it's because it's so satisfying or filling, you're just not going to eat that much to create a big insulin response. So having protein, we talk about, your beef and chicken and fish, and for vegetarians, tofu, tempeh, and things like that. So incorporating protein, you can say maybe a third of your plate is protein. And then the third thing is to increase your consumption of healthy fats. A lot of people try to stay away from fat, thinking that fat is what is clogging up the blood vessels and choosing fat-free things. If you're going to choose something that has fat-free on the label, just know that that is going to give you an insulin response. That's going to carry up your insulin and contribute to insulin resistance, because the fat was taken out, but it was replaced by something to make it palatable, to make it taste good. And usually they replace that fat with sugar, right? So just avoid anything that says fat-free on the label. And generally speaking, like embrace fat, particularly naturally containing fats in food. So your nuts are fatty, your avocado, your olives, olive oil, coconut, things like that. It's just naturally containing fat. Butter is not bad either. And don't worry about saturated versus unsaturated, because ultimately it's kind of hard to overconsume fat, because again it's very satiating or satisfying. Like we said, protein is satisfying. Like, you are not going to be able to just overeat fat, because you're just going to get full. Okay, so naturally occurring fats, as opposed to like processed fats, from like vegetable oils, seed oils, canola oil, soybean oil, those kind of highly processed fats, you really want to avoid those, because they're more like easy to oxidize and basically damage your body, like promote inflammation. So you want to avoid those. And of course, fats are not going to cause any insulin response whatsoever. So those are what you're going to do to kind of help reverse insulin resistance. You're going to decrease your intake of refined starches and put more vegetables in place of all that starch. 2, have more protein in your meals. 3, embrace naturally occurring fats. And generally speaking, you can say a third of your plate as vegetables, a third as protein. Well, I guess it can't be, they say in your diet you should have a third of your total calories for the day be from fat, healthy fat. So you might spread it out, but basically you're gonna get fat from nuts and, like we said, avocado and so on. So a third. If you're gonna have specific starch, I always say let it be less than a quarter of your plate at any one time for a meal. Okay, so that is what you're going to do to help to reverse insulin resistance. And like I said, insulin resistance is everybody's business, because practically 1 in 3 people have insulin resistance, which means that out of every 3 of you watching this, 1 of you would be insulin resistant. And if you're insulin resistant, it means that there's a high chance that you are pre-diabetic or maybe even diabetic. And in the hospital every day, we get people who we're diagnosing with diabetes for the first time because they didn't know, like they never went to the doctor, they never got checked. So if you have 2 at least of any of the symptoms and signs I outlined in the beginning of the video, see your healthcare provider to get tested for all these chronic medical conditions, and don't wait until it's too late when you have to actually be admitted as a patient in the hospital. Hope you all found this helpful. Comment below with any questions. Otherwise, feel free to share this video with a friend. Have a good evening.